A man of thoughts possessed. He called himself Man of Thoughts, apt once. A blogger, dissecting life's absurdities with sardonic wit. Now, he barely recognized the gaunt, hollow-eyed reflection staring back. Obsession had a way of doing that, stripping you bare until only the craving remained. Hers. Her laugh, the way her name tasted on his tongue, a fleeting touch he'd replayed in his mind 1,000 times, each repetition more agonizingly vivid than the last. It had begun innocently enough, or so he told himself. Now, his every waking moment, every fever dream was consumed by her. The man of thoughts was no more, only a man enthralled, a prisoner in love's gilded cage. The alchemy of agony, turning joy to poison. The transformation of something pure into something toxic, a process as old as time itself. Obsessive love has a peculiar alchemy. It starts innocently enough, a glance, a smile, a shared moment, but soon it begins to change. It takes the ordinary, the mundane details of a person's existence and transmutes them into something precious, addictive. Every little thing becomes a treasure, a piece of a puzzle that only you can see. The way she took her coffee, black, 2 sugars, a symphony of bitterness and sweetness just like her. Each sip, a reminder of her complexity, her depth. The way she scrunched her nose when she concentrated, a quirk he found endearing beyond reason. It was these small, seemingly insignificant details that he cherished the most. He clung to these fragments, these scraps of information, like a starving man to crumbs. Each piece was a lifeline, a connection to her world. Each one a fleeting hit of dopamine fueling the obsession further. The more he learned, the more he wanted to know. It was a never-ending cycle. He remembered a story, a young woman driven mad by her infatuation with a minor celebrity. She had lost herself in her obsession, unable to see the world beyond him. She'd plastered her bedroom with his image, collected his discarded coffee cups from the trash outside his apartment building. He'd pitied her then. Now he understood. He saw the same madness in himself, the same desperate need for connection. Obsession was a hunger that could never be sated, only amplified with each bite. It consumed him, leaving him empty and longing for more. The joy he once felt had turned to poison, a toxic brew that he couldn't escape. The alchemy of agony had done its work, transforming love into something dark and dangerous. Reflections in an empty mirror when you vanish in their gaze. It's a haunting experience, one that leaves you questioning your very existence. You start to wonder if you ever truly existed in their eyes, or if you were just a fleeting shadow, a mere figment of their imagination. He'd once prided himself on his self-awareness, his sharp observations of the human condition. He could read people like open books, understanding their motivations, their fears, their dreams. But now, those skills seemed to have deserted him. Now, his own reflection was a stranger. The person staring back at him was someone he didn't recognize, someone who had lost their way. It was as if he had been erased, replaced by a hollow shell. He'd become a pale imitation of himself, his personality molded to what he thought she desired. Every decision, every action was influenced by her preferences, her likes and dislikes. He no longer knew where she ended and he began. Her favorite music became his, her political views his own. He adopted her tastes, her opinions, her worldview, all in an attempt to stay relevant in her life. But in doing so, he lost his own identity. A chilling anecdote came to mind. A man so obsessed with his co-worker that he underwent cosmetic surgery to resemble her ex-boyfriend. The lengths people go to for love, or what they perceive as love, can be terrifying. The desperation in that act, the utter annihilation of self. It sent a shiver down his spine. He realized he was on a similar path, willing to sacrifice everything that made him unique just to be a part of her world. He saw a flicker of that same desperation in his own reflection, a willingness to disappear entirely if it meant existing in the periphery of her world. It was a sobering realization, one that made him question his choices, his sacrifices, and ultimately his sense of self. He knew he had to find a way back to himself, to reclaim his identity before it was too late. The mind unspools, fractured by fixation sleep. Once a refuge became a battleground. Each night he found himself locked in a relentless struggle, his mind refusing to grant him the peace he so desperately needed. The darkness of his room mirrored the turmoil within, a constant reminder of the battles he fought alone. His nights were haunted by dreams of her, vivid and cruel, offering glimpses of a happiness he could never attain. These dreams were not mere figments of his imagination, but vivid reenactments of moments they had shared, twisted by his longing and regret. Her smile, once a source of joy, now tormented him, a cruel reminder of what he had lost. He woke each morning, heart hammering, a thin sheen of cold sweat clinging to him. The dawn's light brought no solace, only a brief respite before the cycle began anew. His body ached from the tension, his mind weary from the endless torment. The lack of sleep sharpened the edges of his reality, making everything seem raw, unbearable. The world around him felt harsh and unforgiving, every sound too loud, every light too bright. His senses were on high alert, amplifying his suffering. He recalled a case study he'd read in college, a woman driven to a nervous breakdown by her unrequited love. The parallels between her story and his own were striking, and he couldn't help but wonder if he was destined for the same fate. The memory of her tears haunted him, a stark reminder of the fragility of the human mind. She'd become convinced they were meant to be, saw signs of their destined union everywhere. Her obsession had consumed her, blinding her to reality. He saw now how easy it was to fall into that trap, to let one's mind create a world that didn't exist. He'd dismissed it then, a textbook example of erotomania. It had seemed so clear-cut, so easy to diagnose from a distance. But now, with his own sanity in question, he realized how thin the line was between rationality and madness. Now he felt the edges of his own sanity fraying, the line between reality and delusion blurring. The mirror reflected not just his face, but the cracks in his psyche. Each day he struggled to hold on, to distinguish between what was real and what was a product of his fractured mind. The battle was relentless, and he feared he was losing. Love's cruel bargain, a soul for a shadow, Obsessive. Love wasn't love, it was a parasite, feeding on its host until nothing remained but a hollowed-out shell. He'd sacrificed his passions, his friendships, at the altar of this all-consuming infatuation. His blog, once a source of sardonic amusement, lay abandoned, its digital pages gathering dust. He thought of the myth of Echo, cursed to repeat the words of others, her own voice stolen by a jealous hearer. He too felt like an echo, his own identity subsumed by his obsession. He'd traded his soul for a shadow, a phantom of connection that existed only within the confines of his own mind.